Hello, this is Congressman Brad Sherman live in Washington, D.C. We're about to start our San Fernando Valley Town Hall meeting. Now, I'd like everybody to write down the following phone number just in case we get disconnected. That's 855-920-0548. So if you get disconnected, just call back 855-920-0548. And that number will also be good for our next town hall, which is tentatively scheduled to be February 28th, last day of this month, again at 7 p.m. I'll be here in Washington until Thursday when I fly back to the San Fernando Valley. I'll be at the VICA Congressional Breakfast. I'll be at the North Valley Regional Chamber of Commerce swearing in of new officers, and hope to see you there or just bump into you at Ralph's. And we'll be adding more events to that schedule. Just a couple weeks ago, I had the honor of being at St. Catherine of Siena and Our Lady of the Valley churches, and we're always looking for opportunities for me to go to a church or synagogue and just let people know about our fine constituent service program. And that's something I'll tell you about in just a second. But first, I want to talk about how this town hall operates. I know most of you already know, but I know we've got some people who haven't joined us before. We have thousands of people listening. If you dial *3, you'll be connected to my staff. If you've got a personal matter, maybe a case involving a federal agency, you can talk to our fine constituent service staff. But most people who dial *3 will want to be put in the queue and ask a question, be heard by thousands of Valley residents, perhaps make a comment. Now we're going to be doing this for about an hour and 5 minutes, and you can listen to our prior town halls. You can RSVP for our upcoming town hall meetings by going to bradsherman.house.gov. That's House for House of Representatives. .gov, and we'll be taking questions from the floor. I also have some written questions that people who have RSVP'd have submitted in advance, and we will also be doing survey questions. So even if you don't have a chance to ask your full question, you'll be able to express yourself on 5 or 6 different public policy issues. So everyone who's on this call will have a chance to let me know where you stand on a number of issues. Now, I want to put in a pitch for our constituent service team. On the line, we've got Scott Abrams, who heads that team, along with Kimberly Casteras, who joined us recently. And their office, of course, is located in America's best named city, Sherman Oaks. Imagine a federal agency makes a mistake. It could happen. It could affect you. You call Scott, you call Kimberly, they'll work very hard, they solve your problem, and then I, Brad Sherman, take the credit. What you need then, for future reference, because you may not have a problem today, but you need the number 818-501-9200. They'll be available tomorrow morning. And, of course, a couple are on the call now, and if you dial *3, we'll try to connect you if you have a constituent service problem. We're going to have 2 guest speakers, one with us again. She has really helped us a lot in bringing to the San Fernando Valley a lot of intelligent insight into this COVID epidemic. Dr. Lynn Goldman, who is both a pediatrician and an epidemiologist. And in prior town halls, I've taken the opportunity to describe all of, or at least many of her qualifications. They are impressive. We're also going to hear from Assemblyman Gabriel, who will talk to us about what's happening in Sacramento and what programs there are at the state level designed to help people out. He'll be going on at around 7:30. Now, I just want to, and I've covered this before, describe a little bit what's happening, or the scenery here in Washington. You've got to remember that this country is not as progressive as Los Angeles, that And in trying to reach consensus, it's one thing to reach across the 405 freeway and to reach consensus among people in the San Fernando Valley. That gets more difficult when you think of the difference in views in Mississippi and Oklahoma and Maine, and you realize that the Senate is in effect gerrymandered toward the smaller states. The two Dakotas together get 4 senators, and yet the two Dakotas have less people than the San Fernando Valley. A majority of the Senate is either voted for Trump themselves, or they're representing a state that voted for Donald Trump. And this is in a country that voted pretty decisively for Joe Biden. The Senate is not a representative body. It represent in terms of representing the population of the United States. We've actually gotten a few good things done in the last year. We've seen over 6.5 million jobs created. The unemployment rate has dropped precipitously. The average number of Americans filing unemployment claims is the lowest it's been since the 60s. When President Biden took office, there were 8 million people receiving unemployment benefits. Now there are about 2 million. And of course, the child poverty rate has been reduced to the lowest it's ever been in American history. We have a cabinet that looks like America, a majority of people of color, more women than ever, the first open member of the LGBTQ plus community, and I think by the end of the month we are going to see the first African American woman nominated for the Supreme Court. Some 75% of all adults are fully vaccinated, and this has been accomplished with the thinnest majority imaginable in Congress. We have also passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill that really reflects what we should have done 5 years ago. It'll provide unprecedented investments in roads, airports, and it's particularly our ports, Long Beach and San Pedro, where if only we had improved those ports 5 years ago, we would not have the inflation that we're seeing with the bottlenecks that we're facing today. So with that, I'm going to take a couple of questions from the floor, from people who have dialed *3, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Lynn Goldman.
Okay, Congressman, we have Victor who has a question about mask mandates. Victor, you should be on now.
Yes. I had
and I may throw if it's a medical question, I may throw it to Dr. Goldman. But go ahead.
No, yeah, it sounds amazing. But I just was wondering if we may, in the Los Angeles Valley area, if we may take off the mask mandates, so children aren't filled with fear anymore, because you could tell the fear in their eyes. They think that we're in this very, very, very critical pandemic moment, when it was actually in the beginning when it was very critical. But now it has eased up a little bit, and well, I want them to see all of our shiny faces, smiling faces.
I do think it's important that at the earliest possible time we get rid of mask mandates for kids in schools, but it's got to be done safely. I've got young kids, believe it or not. If you look at if you've seen my picture, I'm bald and aging a little bit, but my 10-year-old, my youngest, isn't filled with fear. She views the mask as a fashion accessory, but that doesn't mean that masks are good for kids. I don't, and they've spent the last 2 years. I don't know if the masks are making them afraid, but they're certainly making them uncomfortable, with the possible exception of my daughter. As to where we stand with masks, at the state level, the mandate ends February 15th. In Los Angeles County, they will continue to be in force until hospitalizations drop to an average of 2,500 in 7 consecutive days. And that reflects the fact that any mask mandate has got to be adjusted for the public health situation in the particular locality. If for older students, Cal State Northridge is returning to on-campus learning. I believe they're requiring masks. I'm not certain. And when I turn this over to Dr. Goldman, I want to hear her comments about mask mandates, because the hardest thing, you have two very hard things to do here. First is to determine whether the degree to which the mask mandate reduces the spread of COVID. And then the even more difficult thing is to weigh the COVID benefits against what the questioner was talking about, in the sense of all the psychological harms that this can do to school kids, whether it's preventing them from picking up cues from their teacher, relating to other students, and the questioner put forward the idea that they would be afraid. And so it's certainly tough to weigh these things. I know Dr. Goldman's in a good position to advise us on the degree to which the masks and the different types of masks reduce the spread of COVID, and I'll be asking her that soon, but let's go on to the next question.
Okay, Congressman, we have Mike, who's from Woodland Hills. Mike, you are on.
Hi, Congressman.
Hello, Mike.
I was watching television, a few weeks back, and Janet Yellen was on there explaining why we needed to raise the national debt by $3 trillion so that we could borrow $3 trillion to pay our current bills.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, if we have to borrow $3 trillion to pay our current bills, how in the world can we justify a $3.5 trillion Build Back Better bill? I don't understand how would you spend that much money?
Let's review. There have been a number of huge spending bills that have not been paid for, and they've been part of the COVID crisis. And all but one of them was signed by Trump. The most recent one was signed by Biden. And during this COVID crisis, there has been deliberate increased deficit spending. As to Build Back Better, that bill is paid for chiefly by taxes on corporations that have been escaping international taxation, and a number of other steps. So if you, as the Build Back Better bill, provide tax breaks, and they are expensive, to parents, $250 or $300 per child per month. That's expensive unless at the same time you're collecting more from multinational corporations. So the deficit is a significant problem. It is caused by ongoing spending that is higher than the revenues we take in, and that's something both parties have done just about every year, Republican and Democratic controls this century. We had some surplus years under Clinton, but that was a long time ago. The two times where one party has added to the deficit by an extraordinary action was the huge Trump tax cuts that increased the deficit by about $2 trillion, and there may have been one or two Democrats who voted for it, but that was basically a unipartisan decision. And then the American Rescue Plan, which we passed about 10 months ago, was the final COVID emergency bill, and that one added about $1.9 trillion to the deficit. It was almost entirely Democratic. The other deficit spending has been bipartisan. We can do some deficit spending without hurting the economy. We've shown that there's a limit to what we can do. A critical reason we can do it is because we're the world's reserve currency. and that has allowed us to be able to do some deficit spending without it being inflationary. But obviously, these COVID emergency bills have been far beyond any amount of deficit spending that we would want to see in any normal time, or that we would expect to see without the adverse problems. Finally, your question focuses on whether to vote to increase the debt limit, and that's just a matter of being responsible. You go to a restaurant and somebody you order the lobster and your spouse orders the surf and turf, and it's not on your budget and you can't afford it. Well, that's when you made a mistake. You went to that restaurant and then you ordered the most expensive thing on the menu. You do not escape that mistake by running out of the back of the restaurant without paying. That doesn't work. That will cause you more problems than adding to your Visa deficit or your MasterCard deficit and paying for the meal that you couldn't afford. The only thing worse than spending more money than you should is refusing to pay. And once we pass the bills that spend the money, for us to say we can escape the problem by not paying, just as running out of the back of the restaurant is a bad move for you and your spouse, because among other things, you destroy your credit, your freedom, your sense in the community, etc. If the U.S. were to, even for one day, fail to pay its debts, you would blow a big hole in the international economy. So you can say we should tax more. You can say we should spend less. But you can't say spend a lot, tax a little, and then renege on the debt. Fail to. And when you borrow money for a year by issuing a U.S. Treasury note, and then it's time to pay it, what you might do, and what we do is you issue a new note, you collect from the new investor, you pay off the old investor. If you refuse to do that, if you say, well, I'm not going to I'm not going to borrow any more money from the new investor, well, the old investor has a contractual right to be paid after 1 year. And if you stiff that person, you blow a huge hole in the international economy. So I'll listen to people who say we should tax more. I'll listen to people who say that we should spend less. There is nothing more irresponsible than saying, well, we voted for low taxes, we voted for high spending, and now we will not pay our bills. We'll not borrow in order to pay our bills. We'll just stiff our creditors. That works out very poorly. And to even think about that, to even get close to the line, is a self-inflicted wound. And our economy would be a little better if we had never even flirted with the idea of stiffing our creditors. With that, I want to introduce Dr. Lynn Goldman. She is I don't know which. I've covered all of her accomplishments, or many of them, in prior town halls. Let me just turn it over to Lynn.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And so as an epidemiologist, this is a time that I love to be in this meeting with you, because we're seeing a downturn in COVID in LA and California, and really across the entire country almost. And the rates are dropping very fast. And what I mean by that is that while every day there are far more new cases a day than there were last November, last October, they're far less than there were just a week or two ago. And that is really encouraging. And at the same time, we're also seeing fewer people in the hospital and fewer daily deaths. Are there still a lot of hospitalizations and deaths every day in LA? Yes, there are. And are we unhappy about that? Yes, because it does represent a lot of tragedy. And I don't want to give an overly optimistic view, but I can see how in the next few weeks it's getting better and better and better. And I think your caller who asked about whether masks will be able to come off and there will be fewer restrictions, I think almost certainly that will be the case when the local conditions can allow that. And of course, it's up to the LA Public Health Authorities to make that decision. But there's some really great things that we've been learning. And one is how well the vaccines are still working against COVID, and especially the combination of being fully vaccinated plus having a booster. But even being fully vaccinated, the chance that you go to the hospital is so much lower than people who are not vaccinated. And we have such solid evidence of that now. And I would continue to say, if you haven't been vaccinated yet, meaning, your first round of immunizations and then a booster, it's still worth doing it because there's still a lot of transmission of COVID, and it's going to continue for quite some time. Some of the other things that we're learning are not so good, but they're important for us to know. And one is that just today in the famous New England Journal of Medicine, the Centers for Disease Control reported a huge study showing that of people who had COVID in the first couple of years, that 1 in 10 have had prolonged effects, meaning beyond the time of the infection, continuing to have fairly serious symptoms and health problems. And that's a pretty high rate of, if you may, kind of adverse effects from having the infection. The other thing, in another journal today, the Journal of the American Medical Association, was a study of many, many women who got COVID or didn't have COVID during pregnancy, again, during the first year or so of the epidemic. And the news was not good. If you are pregnant and have COVID, you increase your risk that your baby will be born preterm, that you or your child might actually die, that it's an increased risk of the mother or the fetus dying, or that either one of you or both might end up in intensive care. And a small proportion of those children were actually born with COVID. And yet a vaccine is safe during pregnancy. And I think if not going to the hospital and not dying isn't enough of a reason to get the vaccine, prevention of these longer-term effects and certainly protection, not only your own pregnancy potentially, but the pregnancies of your friends, your relatives, your children, that's another reason to do it. So a lot of news today, but mostly I think a great outlook over the next couple of months as we move into a period where hopefully we're beyond this peak from the Omicron variant of COVID and hopefully have a respite from having any more peaks, maybe ever or maybe for a long time. That's what one would hope for.
Thank you. There's so much to cover on the medical side of this, and I know we'll get some more questions for Dr. Goldman as we go forward. Now we're going to do a survey question so everybody can participate. You participate by pushing the buttons on your phone, and you probably got the mailer that we did that had a questionnaire attached. We've received close to 2,000 responses already, and they're still coming in. And so I want to compare that tabulation, which we haven't done yet, to those who are on the phone with us today by asking the same question, and that is, whose job performance was better as president? Press 1 for Joe Biden, 2 for Donald Trump, 3 if you think they're about equal, and 4 if you're unsure. So compare our two most recent presidents, and if you think Biden did the best job, press 1, Trump 2, roughly equal 3, unsure 4. Don, let's take the next question from the floor.
Yes, sir. We have Phyllis from Tarzana. A question about the January 6th committee. Phyllis, you're on now.
Thank you, Congressman, for taking my call, and thank you for these town hall meetings. I think they're very important. My question is, can you please explain to those of us citizens who simply are finding it difficult to bide through this waiting, this long waiting between actions taken by the committee? They ask someone to appear, then they're given a certain amount of time to appear. Then if they don't, then they're subpoenaed. They get a certain amount of time to respond to the subpoena. If they refuse or defy the subpoena, they're given another certain amount of time. Please explain to us why that process takes so long. And also, the second part of the question is, how can we be assured, since they have been forewarned or requested to please preserve their records, while all this waiting time is going on and they're playing cat and mouse, biding their time, playing out the clock until November when they think they're going to win and destroy the committee, how can we be assured that these people in the meantime are not destroying their evidence, their records?
I wish I had great answers for you. It is a slow process by which you put someone in jail for failure to testify before Congress. It is a multi-step process that you identified. And I've been on some committees, not quite not quite as high profile as the January 6th, where we have simply not been able to get the testimony that we want. Ultimately, you have to go through the process, then get the Justice Department to bring a criminal action. There's the possibility that people destroy evidence before they're subpoenaed or instructed to retain the evidence, or afterwards. With modern technology, it is harder and harder to destroy evidence. It used to be that important documents, were typed back in the early part of my career. Maybe you had carbon paper in earlier times. So there'd be only one or two copies of the document, and if it was destroyed, it was destroyed. Now, every email is copied, recopied, and so there is a good chance that an effort to destroy anything that was ever electronic will not be successful. And yes, the Republican Party will probably end this committee if they are successful in the November election. A lot of folks are talking about that being a fait accompli. It is not. And a lot depends on COVID. If by April of this year it's ollie oxen free or something approaching that, I think the economy's going to do a lot better, and people are going to be just a lot happier. So, that is a real possibility. So I don't think you can count on the committee ending. Finally, I've had a few talks with the people who are on the committee, and while there have been these obstacles to getting the information, they've got a lot. And this will be a very interesting report. But what we already know is, and it was, I wasn't as afraid on January 6th as I was a year later, that the crazies who were here ripping things up were just the tip of the iceberg. This was an overall effort to void the election and retain power. And that is very dangerous. I served with Mike Pence for 10 years in the House. I didn't agree with him on very many things, but what he was being asked to do was so extremely traitorous to our country, and he was under pressure to do it, and he didn't do it. And as he pointed out, imagine how this country will react if in January of 2025, Vice President Harris decides to ignore the official electoral college votes coming in from Alabama or Texas and just throws them away and says, "Well, any vice president can do that." That's a way that's a way to destroy democracy in this country. Let's go to the questions on who's the best doing the best job as president. We got 75% Biden, 17% Trump, 4% equal, and 5% unsure. Let's go on to the next survey question. Again, this one is also from the Britain questionnaire. Do you support the Senate abolishing the filibuster in order to pass progressive legislation, such as laws protecting elections and voting rights, protecting the planet from climate change, and immigration reform? If you're for abolishing the filibuster, press 1. If you are against abolishing the filibuster, press 2. And if you're unsure, press 3. Let's go on to one more question from the floor, and then we'll hear from Assemblyman Jesse Gabriel.
Okay, Congressman, we have Nancy with a question about student loan forgiveness. Nancy, you're on now.
Hello, Congressman. Good evening. I live in the Lake area. I often get phone calls from companies saying that I qualify for student loan forgiveness. I'm not sure if they're legitimate, so I haven't contacted them back. My question is, I've read that President Biden has passed some form of student loan forgiveness. Can you please explain to me if there is currently student loan forgiveness, some new program under the new administration? If so, how would I know if I qualify or not?
Well, first of all, one part of this problem that doesn't get covered is that at least the private schools have raised their tuitions to points where people, paying, $50,000 a year and so that's part of the problem. Tuition at private universities is higher than it needs to be, especially those that have major endowments. Second, and we have kept the interest rate on student loans low. Third, there is forgiveness 10 years out if you've spent your career in public service, or I believe it's 20 years out. And I know my legislative director will come and hand me a note if I have that year wrong, but I think it's 20 years out. I can't judge your age over the phone here, so I don't know how long it's been since you left college. And so there is a forgiveness program, but it's after quite a number of years. There is an argument out there that says that the president by himself can just forgive student debt. That would be, that would cost the Treasury, I think, something on the order of $1 trillion. And it's questionable whether the president can do that without Congress. If that's proposed to Congress, it has to be weighed against other kinds of relief that we can provide people. And I know I talk to people with student debt, and they say, well, that's the thing that Congress should provide relief on. But then I talk to parents who have seen this $250 per child tax credit, $300 for youngest children, go away, and they point out, hey, I didn't go to college, I'm working for minimum wage or a bit above that, and I need relief. So I don't think. And then finally, there are those students who went to a phony college and or for-profit school, and a few of those debts have been forgiven because there was no or very little legitimate education going on, and there was fraud involved in the whole process. So we do have a forgiveness program now. It's what I outlined. Whether it gets to be more generous or not, I don't know. Yeah, and
Mr. Congressman, if I could add something.
Sure.
There are also phone scammers who pretend to be legitimate student loan companies and which are not. And the caller could call her own company to find out if they actually are trying to reach out to her, because some of these are actually just trying to get you to give them money for nothing.
Wherever there's a legitimate program, there's an illegitimate outfit out there trying to take advantage. Don't give out your Social Security number to somebody who calls you. And these forgiveness programs, you don't have to pay some outside outfit to learn what the law is or to take advantage of it. So again, it's the outstanding balance is forgiven after 20 years for undergraduate study, 25 years for professional or graduate study, and I believe that's cut down to 10 years in most cases for those who are in the government and public sectors. So that's the program that exists. But for God's sakes, if somebody calls you about that program and asks for your Social Security number and tells you to wire money to a Nigerian prince, don't do it. With that, I should take one question from those who have written in and RSVP'd and submitted a question. And then we're going to turn it over to Jesse Gabriel for just a bit for Sacramento Report. Got a question here from Richard Bort of Granada Hills. What have you done in the past 10 years to personally reach across the aisle and work in a bipartisan manner on important issues? I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, which is almost entirely bipartisan. And we almost everything we do there, especially with a focus on human rights, has been bipartisan. We have a number of bills dealing with the Rohingya and the terrible conflagration in Ethiopia and the what appears to be attempted genocide of the people of Tigray, et cetera. And I think all those bills will pass on a bipartisan basis. Over in the Financial Services Committee, Senator Kennedy, a Republican from Louisiana, and I have taken the lead on making sure that when a Chinese company seeks American investors, that they have adequate financial statements that have been properly audited. And in particular, for a public company, you not only just have the audit, but then you have the audit of the audit. And Chinese companies have refused to allow that audit of the audit done by the PCAOB, which is the Public Company Audit Oversight Board. And so we have given these companies 3 years' notice. They won't be on U.S. exchanges unless they agree to make sure that that their financial statements can really be relied upon by American investors. Also, in the financial services area, there's a huge problem that I hope never gets covered in the daily news, because if it gets covered in the daily news, it'll be because we didn't solve it before it exploded. And that is what is called the Libor Problem. It affects roughly 16 trillion, that's with a T, in debt instruments, mortgages, business loans, that will all reach a point, all these instruments, the amount that the borrower pays the lender is according to the contract, to be defined by the Libor index, which is published in London and reflects the London interbank rate. And for these $16 trillion of loans, the Brits are going to stop publishing the Libor rate. And so you'll have literally millions of business loans and tens of millions of mortgages where nobody knows exactly to the penny how much the borrower is supposed to pay. So I've got a bill to solve that. We passed it through the House. I don't think I've worked on anything harder. And it passed with only 9 dissenting votes. So now we have to get that through the Senate. If we do, hopefully, aside from those people who are on the call, not many people in the Valley will know about it, because if you can solve a problem before it affects anybody's life, we can go on to the next issue. But one thing that this answer illustrates is that in many cases it's things that aren't on. When you get partisan conflict, that's when it's on the front page of your newspaper. So when we deal with things in a bipartisan way, as we sometimes do, it's thought to be boring. And it doesn't get the same coverage. I'll also point out that that in 2020, all of the COVID relief bills dealing with vaccinations, dealing with the Paycheck Protection Program, all of that was bipartisan. And I was involved in writing parts of each bill, and of course supporting the bulk of the bill, most of which I did not write. So that's on the bipartisanship. This country hasn't been this divided for over 100 years, and yet at the same time, the press emphasizes the division because Democrats attacking Republicans and Republicans attacking Democrats gets them more readership than the CPA caucus, with it, which I co-chair, getting together to discuss alternatives to the Libor rate in a sensible manner without raising our voices. It makes for boring television. So with that, I want to introduce Jesse Gabriel, who represents the West San Fernando Valley in the Assembly. And Jesse, perhaps you can tell us what's going on in Sacramento.
Yeah, thank you so much, Congressman. It's great to be here with you this evening. I really appreciate the opportunity and appreciate everything you are doing for the San Fernando Valley in Washington, D.C. As the Congressman mentioned, my name is Jesse Gabriel. For the past 3 years, have had the great honor of representing our community in the California State Legislature. So coming to you this evening from Sacramento, where the legislature has recently returned to session. I will be back in the Valley on Thursday, so I go back and forth every week, Monday through Thursday up here in Sacramento, and Friday through Sunday down in the Valley with my family. Wanted to give you a quick update on what we're up to. So obviously a very, very busy time here in the legislature. Top priority is working on COVID, and actually today, the legislature passed a number of bills related to COVID relief. The most important is one that would provide 2 weeks of COVID-19 supplemental paid sick leave. So this would allow workers in the state of California 2 weeks of paid sick leave to recover from COVID, to care for a family member that has COVID, to care for children who are sick or quarantining. I have 3 little kids, 6 and under, so I'm very familiar with the challenges that parents are going through right now, and also would allow folks time off to go get vaccinated. And so I obviously really, really want to encourage those of you that haven't been vaccinated yet to go get vaccinated and get boosted. It's the most important thing that we can do to put the pandemic in the rearview mirror. And obviously, we feel that this is important not just to protect those that become sick, but obviously to protect everyone. We don't want people who have tested positive for COVID coming into work, feeling pressure to come into work. We want them to stay home to protect themselves and to protect everybody else. We also passed today legislation that would provide
Jesse, if I can just comment, in much of this country, employers don't have to provide any sick days at all people who are living paycheck to paycheck are therefore almost forced to come in even when they feel sick and even when they're contagious, and it might be with the flu, it might be with COVID, whatever. It's been Rosa DeLauro and I are working on legislation to at least provide 2 weeks of paid sick leave to every employee of the country. But we're not there yet, at least in less progressive places than California.
Well, we appreciate that very much, Congressman, and obviously this was a huge priority for workers in the state of California, for our frontline and essential workers who have sacrificed so much for us during the pandemic. So I was particularly pleased that we were able to get that through the legislature today, and optimistic that the governor is going to sign it soon. But in addition to that, at the same time, we also provided $1.9 billion in emergency funding. So this is funding for testing, for vaccination, for hospital surges, for emergency needs, because even though we're making good progress, as Dr. Goldman mentioned, obviously still some challenges from the pandemic, and we want to make sure we have the resources to support our hospitals and our frontline healthcare workers as we continue to work through the pandemic. And then actually also as part of this, we today also took some votes to extend some tax credits, which will support our workers and our businesses that are struggling through COVID. So we know a lot of our small businesses have had a particularly challenging time. And so our approach here in Sacramento is how can we do as much as possible to support our workers, but to also support the economy, keep people safe, and we took some steps to do that today. The other thing I wanted to put on people's radar is that California homeowners who are struggling because of the pandemic can now apply for up to $80,000 in mortgage relief. And this is thanks to some really good work that the congressman and his colleagues have done in Washington, D.C. through the American Rescue Plan. And if you want to find out more about that, if you want to find out if you're eligible for that mortgage relief, you can call my district office in Woodland Hills. And the number is 818-346-4521. Against that, it's 818-346-4521. You can also email me at assemblymember.gabriel@assembly.ca.gov, or better yet, just put Jesse Gabriel into Google. You'll find all of the information. You can call our district office, and we're here to help. And then just very quickly, some other stuff that we're working on. Top of the priority list for me has been protecting vulnerable communities. So obviously in the wake of that very scary hostage situation at Congregation Beth Israel in Texas, I have introduced legislation to extend the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which is a program that came about from some legislation that I authored to protect institutions that are at risk of hate-motivated violence, religious institutions, LGBTQ community centers, reproductive health clinics. Really proud that the state of California recently allocated $50 million to protect institutions at risk, and almost $5 million in grants came to organizations serving the West San Fernando Valley, serving my community and our district. And also getting ready to introduce some other bills on our top priorities: affordable housing and homelessness, gun violence, strengthening public education, climate change, and certainly what the congressman alluded to earlier, protecting our democracy, and particularly holding social media companies accountable. So really a lot on the agenda here in Sacramento, hoping to make progress on a lot of front, but feeling optimistic that there are better days ahead. That hopefully we're going to start to put this pandemic in the rearview mirror, and life will go back to something approaching normal. So very grateful, Congressman, for the work that you're doing. Again, if folks need any help, they can call our district office at 818-346-4521. And certainly couldn't be on this call without saying "Go Rams." So hopefully we're going to have a good Super Bowl victory, and we'll have a lot to celebrate. So thanks for the time, Congressman, and thanks for all your work.
That was going to be in my conclusion. I do want to compliment you for your work on these security grants. I've worked at that at the federal level. We've gotten some grants to some synagogues and others in the San Fernando Valley. And Jesse, you've reminded me to give my email address, which is brad.sherman@mail, that's MAIL, .house.gov. Also, back on that student loan question, in addition to all the relief we talked about during this pandemic, there's been a suspension in having to make payments. I believe the interest continues to run, however, but if you can't make the payment, you can't make the payment, and that has been extended by the Biden administration during the pandemic crisis. And that is to be extended through May of this year. Okay, answers to the last question. Do you support abolishing the filibuster in order to pass progressive legislation? Yes, 61%. No, 21%. Unsure, 18%. And let's go to the next survey question. We're going to go, for my staff, I'm skipping what we're going to ask is C, and I'm going to go on to D, which is, which of the following best describes your view about President Biden's opinion to nominate an African-American woman to this vacancy on the Supreme Court? If you strongly approve, press 1. Somewhat approve, press 2. Somewhat disapprove, press 3. Strongly disapprove, press 4. And unsure, press 5. So strongly approve is 1, strongly disapprove is 4, unsure is 5. Let's go on to the next question.
Okay, Congressman, we have Robin from Tarzana, who I believe has a medical question. Robin, you are on now.
Yes, thank you. Hi, my name is Robin Haley. My question is, I am a Johnson & Johnson. I've been vaccinated with Johnson & Johnson, and so I went in to get my booster, and unfortunately, because they're only allowed to give the half dose of the Moderna, all I've legally been able to obtain is 1 dose of the Johnson & Johnson in March, and on October 26th, a half dose of Moderna. And to be honest, all I keep hearing about is that the second shot of Moderna was stronger, but I don't feel protected. And when I ask for an additional booster, they say they're not allowed to do anything further. So my question is, what can I do about that legally? Or do I just need to put up a fake name, honestly, and go get protected?
Thank you for that question. I think that has been an issue that's been kind of complicated because that first Johnson & Johnson shot was determined to be a full course, but we know now that it doesn't provide as much protection as you had from the full course of the 2-shot vaccines, the Moderna or the Pfizer. But still, the CDC feels that you should follow that through with a booster and not a full dose of one of the other vaccines. And they do think that you're getting adequate protection from that, from the data that they're looking at. And so even though it would seem illogical that, with a lower dose that you would get enough protection, but it is true that in the first place that what you received was something very different in terms of being a preparation that had material from kind of the whole COVID virus, and also that you, when you received the booster, that it would have amplified that protection, and it seems that it's working. You could, if you feel that you have, especially if you feel that you have any kind of medical reasons to need to have an extra level of protection, such as that you have on the basis of your age or underlying medical conditions or any other problems. The other thing that people can get is kind of an extra shot. And I just assume that's something that your healthcare provider would have ordered for you if he or she felt that you were in that position, but that is another alternative. But from all that I can see from the evidence that has been brought together, you should have enough immunity at this stage and should not need another booster shot.
Thank you. We haven't had a foreign policy question yet. I do want to put forward the something on the Ukraine. First and foremost, we are not sending our troops into the Ukraine. Our troops will not be on the front lines. This is not going to be a situation of Americans shooting at Russians or vice versa. That would be incredibly dangerous. We have provided weapons to the government of the Ukraine. The combined terrible cost that Putin would suffer militarily if he went into the Ukraine, I think the Russians would ultimately win, but at a significant cost. And you add the cost in lives and treasure of the battle to the economic sanctions that the U.S. would imply, and I think we may have persuaded Putin not to invade, but we'll have to see. As a practical matter, if Putin doesn't invade in February, he's probably not doing a huge invasion, because to do a massive invasion to try to seize most of the Ukraine, he needs the ground to be frozen, and it won't be frozen in March. It gets muddy in March. So we can hope that we do not see a huge invasion of the Ukraine this month. We now have a written question that I'll answer. We'll take at least one more question from the floor, and we're closing in on the end of the time that we have available. But Stephen Epstein wrote in, how can you possibly have voted for the so-called freedom to vote legislation? This bill is bogus, and you know it. How can you federalize elections? I, of course, did vote for the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, which is a combination of the Senate bill, Freedom to Vote Act, with the House's John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. John Lewis was a friend of mine. I was so proud to be with him on the 50th anniversary of the time that he walked in Selma, Alabama, across the Edmund-Pettus Bridge, and had his skull broken by those who didn't think that African Americans should be allowed to vote. And this is important legislation. It'll make the federal election a federal holiday. I think perhaps its most important provision is to end the partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts. We've already done that in California, where we have a nonpartisan commission draw the lines. But in well over a dozen states, Republicans are screwing Democrats. In over half a dozen states, Democrats are screwing Republicans. That's not, voters should choose the politicians who they're going to elect. Politicians shouldn't choose the voters by these obscure gerrymandering lines of districts. It would require online political ads to tell us who paid for them. It would define coordination. You now have these independent expenditure committees that, frankly, we shouldn't have at all, but they're not even independent because there's no definition of what being independent is. But the questioner also brings up the idea of, is it wrong for the federal government to have any law defining how to conduct an election? And I would just, Stephen, if you're with us, I'd just take a look at the Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 4, which reads, the time, place, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed by each state legislature, by each state by the legislature thereof, but Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulation. So there are an awful lot of things that the federal government does where you have to wonder, did the Constitution give that power to the federal government? But in the area of providing rules for federal elections, it's right there in black and white in the Constitution that Congress has the right to do that. Most of our administration, the actual administration of elections is done at the state and local level. And one of the most worrisome things is an effort in in a number of Republican states to strip local nonpartisan authorities of their rights to conduct the election and to substitute highly partisan political hacks, and that is that really does imperil democracy in our country. We'll do one more survey question, and we probably won't be. I don't know if we'll be able to announce the answer while we're still on. Our vendor will charge us a lot more if we don't wrap this up in the next 6-7 minutes. But final question, what are your views on requirements to show proof of vaccination in order to do certain things like eat at a restaurant, travel on a plane, or attend a sporting event? Requirement to show proof of vaccination. If you support such requirements where they're imposed, press 1 for support, 2 for oppose, and 3 for unsure. Let's squeeze in one more question from the floor.
Okay, Congressman, we do have a foreign policy question from Gregory from Sherman Oaks. Gregory, you're on now.
Hello, Congressman.
Hello.
Right now we're in a time of huge conflict and great worry and Sturm und Drang amongst the nations. The United States at this time could show its good faith for the international order and for a better future in terms of everything from human rights to climate by talking about and then finally at long last ratifying some of the really good international treaties that are languishing without our signature or our support. Like, if I'm correct, the International Treaty on the Rights of the Child, the Landmines Treaty, the Law of the Sea, and any number of other environmental laws, like migratory bird protection, scuttled by the Trump administration. You could talk about this stuff and highlight it, and maybe we can move the United States into ratifying a few of these.
I couldn't agree with you more. The Constitution requires a 2/3 vote in the Senate in order to ratify a treaty, and that is a very high bar to meet in a highly partisan era. We're getting to the point where, I'll illustrate a personal problem I had back in 2020. I was afraid that Donald Trump would issue the traditional Mother's Day, hey, mothers are great statement that you expect from a president, and then there'd be pressure on Democrats to come out against motherhood, because it's almost to the point where, well, if one side's for it, the other side has to be against it. And it is very hard for America to play its role in the world when we have these supermajority requirements in the Senate and a highly divided Congress. So, for many of the treaties you identify, we've signed them, we are committed to following them, but we can't officially ratify them until we get 2/3, and that's even worse than the 60 votes you need to end a filibuster. I think we do need to wrap up here, but we're not completely done. As I hang up, you'll hear the voicemail, and you can leave a message, and I will listen to them tomorrow, and let us know what you're thinking or where I should be devoting my attention. I want to thank Assemblyman Jesse Gabriel, who does such a good job of representing us in the West San Fernando Valley, for joining us, and I especially want to thank Dr. Lynn Goldman for joining us yet again and for giving us a real understandable view of the medical science. Now, also, when the voicemail comes on, please leave your email address, even if I already have it. and that's because I have to deal with the rules of the House that won't let me email you about the next town hall or the one after that unless I get your email directly from you in this manner. So please leave your email address. I look forward to seeing people again in the San Fernando Valley. We expect the next town hall to be February 28th. That date's tentative as of now, but we think it's going to be 7 p.m. on the last day of this month. And if you want to be sure about when the next town hall is, if you want to see the number to call in, and especially if you want to submit a question in advance, you go to bradsherman.house.gov. So thank you very much for participating. Look forward to our next town hall, probably the last day of the month. Look forward to seeing you in the San Fernando Valley. And God, we, of course, go Rams. And we all look forward, I hope, to a spring in which we can all gather again together. And no one wishes that more than myself, because I need to keep in touch with people day to day in the San Fernando Valley. It's great to do it by phone and these telephone town halls. It's even better to be at all the public events that we used to have and will have again in the San Fernando Valley. So I'm Brad Sherman. Thank you very much. Look forward to the next telephone town hall.